I love solving cases and murder mysteries and all that jazz. My first real game of this variety was Danganronpa 1, and I was immediately hooked, but just recently I closed the book on my adventures with these kinds of games by finishing up not only the last game in the recently released Apollo Justice trilogy, but also finishing a couple of lesser known indie games in the same genre that I found myself adoring the playthroughs of just as much as Ace Attorney and Danganronpa themselves. So I'm here today because I want to show just how much love I have for these games by ranking every case I've ever solved in one tier list. I made this tier list, which means that it contains every case of this variety that I have ever played. So that obviously means we're going to be talking some major spoilers today. I'll go ahead and give you the rundown of what is all included in this list here so that you can go and play these games for yourselves if you have not already. If you do not care, however, feel free to use the time codes in the description of the video to skip these introductory bits and go to where you want. But today we're going to be talking about Ace Attorney, all 11 games, and yes, that includes the Professor Layton crossover. We're also going to be talking about Danganronpa, specifically the 3 mainline games. I have played Ultra Despair Girls, but you do not solve cases in it and is therefore not something we're going to be talking about on this list. I will, however, probably mention some spoilers for the Danganronpa 3 anime. If you haven't seen that, so beware. We're also going to be talking Genshin Impact today, specifically the Archon quests for the region of Fontaine. I will not be talking about any world quests. I think there's like one world quest case that I have not done and don't really care, so you don't need to worry about any of that. We're also going to be talking about Master Detective Archives Raincode, the spiritual successor to Danganronpa, as well as that game's DLC chapters. Tyrone Cuthbert, Attorney of the Arcane, is here, and if you have not played this game, stop watching right now and go play it. It's godlike. Aviary Attorney is a game about lawyer birds set a couple hundred years ago in France with a focus on real-life history and revolutions, and it's pretty funny, not gonna lie. We're gonna include that game here today. The Council has a murder case in it that we'll be covering on this list, and there's also a murder mystery quest in old school RuneScape, which we will also be covering on this list. We're also going to be talking about Persona 4 Golden, and we'll probably be mentioning some things from Persona 5 Royal as well. And finally, the Freddy Fish Humongous Entertainment games are something that I just couldn't bring myself to exclude. Now, with all that said, look away now if you don't want to be spoiled on any of those. You ready? Okay, well, this is the list of cases we're gonna be ranking today. All these cases, I think there's 106 total on this list. That's a lot of cases. Now, what exactly has constituted a spot on this list? I'm gonna be talking about that real quick before getting into it. Again, if you don't want to hear any of this, you can skip to when the ranking actually starts by using the time codes in the description below. But for a case to qualify to have a spot on this list, it has to be a case that you, the player, actually have to use deductive reasoning and logic to solve in some extent or capacity, and for this use of logic to be included in the gameplay, so you actually have to figure it out before you can progress with the game. It doesn't necessarily have to be a murder case, or it doesn't necessarily have to be something with lots of long twists and turns like some of the in-game Ace Attorney or Danganronpa cases are like. It doesn't even have to be like difficult at all. Like, it can be something very obvious, but as long as it is something that you have to figure out, that is the main important thing. It has to be something that you, to some extent, even if it's a minimalistic extent, solve on your own by selecting choices or figuring things out. Basically, you can't just play through the game without figuring it out. The characters cannot figure it out for you. For example, a Scooby-Doo game with platforming gameplay like Night of 100 Frights would not count even if the characters are figuring out some dastardly villainous plot along the way. Another good example is the Freddy Fish games. You'll notice that the first two are not included on this list. That is because the first two games do not actually require you to have to figure out who the culprit is and pick them out or anything like that. While there are puzzles involved, you do not actually have to solve a case like you did starting in Freddy Fish 3. And speaking of puzzles, the only Professor Layton game that I've played is Professor Layton vs. Phoenix Wright, and if that's anything to go on, the puzzle-solving gameplay of the Layton half of that game was not nearly as defined as case-solving in the same way as the Phoenix Wright half of it would, and therefore I decided to not play through any of the Layton games before adding them to this list. I just didn't want to. I still don't want to, not gonna lie. The Fortress of Meropide investigation from Genshin Impact is also not included on account of the fact that you don't actually have to solve anything, and that whole ordeal is just you, like, being able to show wrythly that you've learned about the place. In addition, any fan-made games or cases, fan-made Ace Attorney cases, fan-made Danganronpa games do not count. Also, I said games! So any anime like Danganronpa 3 or YouTube videos, even interactive ones that give you time to solve what's going on, like the Ace Attorney Among Us Penultimate Turnabout, which is a great video, you go watch it if you haven't, it's great. But those will not be included. And speaking of Among Us, any quote-unquote cases that I've ever solved in PvP games, like Among Us, Deceit 2, social deduction nonsense, those will not count either. I think by now you all know what I mean when I'm talking about a case on this list, but I did just want to clarify that so that I can say with certainty that this list contains every case that I have ever played. So keeping that in mind, if you know of a game that would still count towards this list after talking about all that and don't see it here, that means that I haven't played it and furthermore probably don't even know it exists. Unless it's Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law specifically, which I have absolute zero interest in playing. But even with all that clarification out of the way, there are still a few cases on this list which technically don't count and will therefore be immediately put down here in the unrankable category. The first two are the two asinine attorney cases. I have not played these, and since I played the Apollo Justice Trilogy on Switch, I have no way of playing them. However, even if I could play these cases, I've read about them and I'm pretty sure they're not considered to be canon, but even if they were, I don't think these necessarily have really strong case content. The next one that I think technically shouldn't count is the Phantom Thieves case, the case from Persona 5 Royal. Even though Sai Nijima is doing her best to solve this case, you, the player, are not actually solving anything. Even when Haru's dad is murdered and you have to figure out the culprit, or Joker rather has to figure out the culprit, and it's this big shocking reveal, I would argue that even despite the choices that you do have to make in the interrogation scene with Sai Nijima, you still don't have to actually solve anything. You do not have to, spoiler alert, figure out that it is Akechi in order to progress through the game, and therefore I don't think it should be considered for this list. Figuring it out is not a prominent point of the gameplay. You can kind of just learn as you play through the game normally. Great game though. I guess I could put it at the top of Unrankable for that reason, if you want to think about it that way. The next one that does not count is Freddy Fish 5. Not gonna lie, when I made this list, I completely forgot of most of what happens in this game and just assumed that you have to figure out who the culprit is like you had to do in Freddy Fish 3 and 4. But that's not the case. This more so goes back to what Freddy Fish 1 and 2 were doing. You don't actually have to solve anything here. It's not a case for the list. And finally, the last one that off the top of my head does not count. I think some may not count later, depending on how things go. But I think off the top of my head, the only other one that definitely does not count is Rain Code DLC 5. There's definitely an argument that none of the Rain Code DLC counts at all, but I'd argue against that, because you definitely have to piece together and figure things out in DLC 1 and 2, and there's a full-blown investigation in the fourth one. Probably a stronger argument that the fourth one doesn't count, but we'll talk about it when we get there. But the fifth one has no case involved with it at all, and it's more so just an additional backstory for Chief Yako and serves as an extension of the game's ending. It's a great extension, I might add. I do think it is probably Rain Code's best DLC chapter, but it's not a case, so we can't rank it. But now it's time to get into the thick of it. I think we have about 101 cases remaining, if I counted correctly. 101 cases to evaluate, so it's a lot of content. I probably won't be able to do this all in one sitting, so please forgive me if there's any specifics of these cases I don't remember. I've tried my best to refamiliarize myself with everything here in preparation for this, but it's a lot. It's a lot. So if there's some details that slip my mind, or if you think a case is great, or if a case is trash because of something that I just don't mention, forgive me, and I encourage you to plead your case in the comments down below. Also, one minor note, if you haven't watched any of my BB tag tier lists, I don't put things in place and lock them in. I think it makes much more sense to allow myself to change things as we go if need be until the very end where I lock everything in all at once. Also, I know this is like pre-editing, but please don't expect me to get clips for all these like I did for the BB tag tier list. This video would take over a year if I did that. But that's where my script ends. Time to kind of just wing it. And I think that the only place to start is with Phoenix Wright 1's tutorial case. All right, got me a big old thing of ice water. We're going to be doing a lot of talking today. So Phoenix Wright 1 case 1 tutorial case. I guess I should say right off the bat that I think that almost every case I've ever played is really good to some extent. Very few cases will be just outright bad. I don't think almost any of these cases are just outright bad, but you'll see when we get there. I think that unless I put something in outright bad, I'd probably call it just a good case in general, even if it has more bad than good, because I enjoyed like all of these games very, very fully, strongly. I loved every single one of these games. They were all great. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, we're talking about Phoenix Wright 1-1. So this is the introduction to Phoenix Wright. This is the introduction to Ace Attorney. You get to see Mia, introduction to Larry Butts. I know it's a tutorial case, but I do dock this case strongly for the fact that it shows you who the killer is at the very beginning. I absolutely hate it when games like this do that. I understand that it's probably meant to be a handicap to give you, the player, and to know who did it, so you know which direction to drive towards, to give you as the player confidence that your client did not in fact do it. That's what I think was going through the game developers' heads when they did what they did with this case. Even though I'm going to go ahead and say that Danganronpa 1 was my first game of this variety, even though I played Danganronpa 1 first, I technically played this game first. Because there was one time where I tried to do a Let's Play of DS Ace Attorney and just did this case before giving up on that.
The defendant, huh? Alright. The defendant is obviously the one who defends, because defend is in the name. So it's me, because I'm the one defending, right?
So this was technically my first exposure to games like this, even though I didn't come back and play Ace Attorney until after I was done with all of Danganronpa. And let me tell you, when I first played this case on the DS, I struggled hard.
Alright, let's present some evidence to contradict your statement. It's this piece of paper that you gave me after it warped out of midair. Let's do this. Object to that. Dramatic point! This is gonna injure you as I slam my desk! Oh yeah, I never thought courting, is that a word? Judging, well, defending, yeah, that must be it. I never thought defending could be this epic. What do you think about the witness's statement? Not sure. What? What do you mean?
Like, this is a tutorial case. This case is supposed to be mad easy. I still struggled hard. I got the answer wrong at the end, too, where you had to show Larry the trophy.
It's not the statue he made for her. I don't think that would prove much. Blunt trauma. Nope, I don't think that. I think that would just make him upset. Nope. The electricity going off doesn't mean she loved him. Passport's the only thing I can see. Oh, scream, take that. Here you go, Larry. Proof. No, wait. Did I get the proof wrong?
I was not inherently built for games like this. It was just something I sort of had to learn as I went. But I think this is a great introduction to the character of Phoenix Wright. It is a shame that this is the only case where we get to see Maya as a person, as a not dead person there helping Phoenix out. I also do like Winston Payne as a tutorial prosecutor. And there were actually some tricky be some tricky elements to this case. Despite being a tutorial case, like I said, I did get stuck on it a number of times the first time I played it. And I would still say that there are like some difficult questions that you have to answer in this case. I honestly think that this is a pretty strong first case. I honestly don't think that this whole bottom half of the tier list is going to be filled out. Maybe it will be if I try to like make the tiers even or like give it a hump. I don't even really dread doing this case when I play through the game a second time. I'm not taking replayability into account all that much. I don't think replayability is a strong factor to consider when ranking a case, because the twists and turns are only going to be impactful to you when you don't know them and when you're figuring it out. But I do keep that in mind when I'm like watching a let's play or introducing a friend to the game and they have no idea what's going on, and it's sort of like reliving the experience of playing the case for the first time. And I don't dread watching people play through this case at all. I don't feel like this game takes a while to get going. I feel like the length of this case is perfect. I like that there's no investigation in the first case. Like some of these other games, like Aviary Attorney, for example, Tyrell and Cuthbert do have investigations in the first cases. And I feel like Phoenix Wright did it really smart making this case the exact length that it was. I think that it's a great introduction to the series. For now, I do think it's fairly decent. I'm gonna put it in B. I would even describe it as real solid overall for what it is, but I don't think that it is an A tier case because it is, after all, just an introduction, a tutorial, even if I do feel like it is a very strong introduction. Larry as a client is great. Frank Saw It throwing your hair in your face is a great meme. Custom animations like that are actually not that common, and I feel like it was a good choice to use a strong one like that right off the bat. I don't think we got something else on that tier until Godot started throwing coffee in your face. It's a good case. It's a good case. I enjoy seeing people play through this case as the first Ace Attorney case. Next is Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Case 2. This is a very important case in terms of the lore. This is our introduction to Maya Fey. Mia dies, all around tragedy there. I do believe that I agree with most people when they say that this game used Red White as a villain too early, but at the same time, if you think about it a little more, I don't think it would have worked if they had saved him for later. If Mia is able to be there with you from start to finish, if you did not have to have that barrier of Maya being in trouble to channel her, then I don't think we'd be able to see Phoenix have to learn and work things out. I do think that it was used correctly, but at the same time, as a writer, you also have to recognize that most people will think that the stakes in this case just set a bar that sort of falls off in the following case, and for a lot of the cases in the succeeding games as well. Very rarely do the stakes ever feel as high as they do in this case. And Red White is also a very hateable villain. You do not get that many hateable villains in Ace Attorney. I actually think Red White is probably the most hateable Ace Attorney villain for mainline Ace Attorney 1 through 6, all the way until we get to Roger Reynolds. I don't think Red White is matched for that long into the franchise. It is kind of a shame that he had to be used this early, but I also don't think anything else would have been as serviceable to the game as it was if they decided to do it at some other point in time. This is also the case that first introduces us to spirit channeling, which I think was a great idea. I think that if Ace Attorney did not have spirit channeling, it just wouldn't be as interesting, flat out. There's just an element to the franchise that just wouldn't be there. Like, not even for Mia and Maya specifically, that just wouldn't be there if it wasn't that mystical, fantastical element to it. Red White really does feel untouchable for the first half of this case, and I almost feel like he gives himself up in a way. If he did not choose himself to come testify on the witness stand, I am unsure how we would have been able to convict him. I do think that no one checking the back of the receipt is kind of cheap. Maybe it would be more excusable if it was like a lesser important point in the case, but checking the back of that receipt is literally how we end up getting Red White, how we end up winning the case against Edgeworth and proving that he could not have just placed the wiretap whenever. This case also introduces Edgeworth. I think this is the only case ever where we see Edgeworth as a stone cold professional prosecutor. Like, even starting as early as the very next case after this one, he starts helping Phoenix out. Updated autopsy report, this case spawned this meme. I think that this case is the only case where Edgeworth really feels like a villain. And I think that's a good thing. That is a good experience to have, especially like someone looking back as someone who's played through all these games, especially the Edgeworth games for obvious reasons. You're never going to feel the same way about Edgeworth as you do playing through this case for the first time. Even if you just beat this game and none of the rest, going against Edgeworth in this case for the first time is just such a unique experience. This case also introduces Dick Gumshoe, great character, but I don't feel like this case really is a very good first impression for him. He kind of came off as a dick in the beginning, and he's really not. He's a great guy, but I didn't like him in this case, man. I'm like, F this guy, this scumbag detective trying to get Maya convicted. April May is a great witness, one of my favorite witnesses in Ace Attorney with one of my favorite themes. I'm not really a big fan of the earlier investigation parts of this case, investigating in the office, investigating Mia's hotel room, or not Mia, April's hotel room. Mia was the victim. Investigating April's hotel room isn't really fun, but when we get to confronting Red White and he throws us in prison, like, that's crazy. You want to sock this guy in the jaw, but you can't because you know you'd be thrown in jail for it, which doubly sucks because he has you thrown in jail anyway. I do feel like we could have had a stronger impression for the first investigation segment of the Ace Attorney franchise, but I think overall this is a very strong case. I wouldn't call it near flawless, but I do think it is amazing, very enjoyable. I feel like Red White being used too early, probably its main drawback. Earlier investigation sequences aren't super hot, but great introduction to Maya, Edgeworth, Dick Gumshoe, staple characters, and Red White is a great villain. April May is a great testimony, and this is one of the few instances in Ace Attorney where you have a personal attachment to the victim. And I think that this is something that Danganronpa does way better, is that in Danganronpa, every killer and every victim are someone you already know and are acquainted with and probably have a personal connection to already. And I think that for a lot of the Ace Attorney cases, the victims really don't matter in the eyes of the player. They're kind of just a plot device to create the case, at least from the viewpoint of the writers. And I think that having someone who was your mentor in the previous case be offed is a great way to not only send Phoenix off as his journey, but to get you immediately invested enough to want to go through these earlier investigation segments. And I think that that overall makes this an amazing case, very enjoyable, A+. Although, unfortunately, this case has the same problem as this case in the sense that this case immediately shows you who the killer is. And I hate it when they do that, man. I don't think you should be able to rule out April May as the killer that easily just because you, the player, saw the murder happen. I think that for that reason alone, as we go through the list, this case may dip into A, because really, that alone just kind of ruins a lot of the first half of this case. I really, really hate that. And this case doesn't even have the excuse of being a tutorial case. It doesn't. I couldn't possibly put it in S for that reason alone. And it really could get down here primarily for that reason, depending on how the rest of the list looks. We'll see. Turnabout Samurai is definitely the weakest part of the first game. In fact, I could even argue that it's potentially the weakest part of the whole first trilogy. It's your first time investigating with Maya because she's not in jail, obviously. And it is nice to see Maya able to act like Maya for the first time and be herself and be peppy. Investigating with her is a pleasure. But man, this case, like, is this case really fun to play? I don't think so. Dealing with Cody Hackins sucks. Dealing with Salmonella sucks. Dee Vasquez is a kind of interesting killer, and I do really like the scene where you're just stupid and show her the photo and she calls goons on you and Gumshoe has to come in and save you. I think that is not only a great point of tension for the climax, showing you how high the stakes are for this case, but I also think that that's a great moment for Gumshoe's character, being able to have a moment like that where he comes in and helps you out like that. But let's be honest, man, that could have happened in the second day of investigation. Why does this case have a third day of investigation at all? It probably feels like the most extreme instance of padding of any case on this list at all. Penny is cute, and I like that you figure out that she's like a trading card nerd. That's great, but that also is only there to deal with the whole Cody Hacken's fetch quest, which I really don't like. Will Powers is okay as a client. I do like him. I think it's stupid that he doesn't tell us originally that the higher bigwigs were there during the day of the crime. I think that if he did, that alone could have saved. I know they were trying to make a reveal, but this case has enough reveals. What with the victim being the one who stole the Steel Samurai costume and tried to do the murder, this character has enough reveals. You don't have to use a whole day just because you suddenly figure out there are more people there. I don't like it, man. Why'd you hide that from me, Mr. Powers? Why? This is also our first introduction to Wendy Oldbag. I don't think Oldbag is nearly as annoying as a lot of people seem to. I've watched a lot of tier lists like this. Not a lot, I guess I should say, because I didn't want my views to be slanted and for people to convince me of things that I don't truly believe. I'm probably gonna watch a lot of tier lists after I'm done with this. But anyway, I actually don't mind Oldbag that much. I think that she is funny, but there is almost no point in the investigation in this case that is enjoyable, aside from Dick Gumshoe saving you from the mafia, which, like I said, is great. Like I said when I was talking about this case, this is the first case where Edgeworth directly helps you, and you start to see the beginnings of his character arc for the rest of the whole franchise. I think that's great. That's a good scene. Edgeworth also has some really great lines when he says, "I was trying to think of something to say when I was objecting, Your Honor. I didn't." That crap was hilarious. Love that crap. Edgeworth being mad because he's left in the dark about things, wasn't given evidence, is just great. It's not really something we see with another prosecutor in Ace Attorney, ever. Edgeworth is great. And I don't think anyone will ever try telling you Edgeworth is not great. But this case is not great. I'm even putting it in D. There's only a few redeeming qualities. The beginning of Edgeworth's arc, just a sliver of Edgeworth's arc, some funny lines, seeing Maya in a happier attitude, that one scene with Gumshoe. And I do think the twist that it was actually the victim who stole the costume and whatnot is a good twist. I like that twist, but I don't think it's enough to carry the case. And like Will Powers said at the end of it, why didn't Jack Hammer just talk to him about it? It's a D tier case. Maybe I'll put it up here if the rest of the list allows it, but nah, I don't enjoy this one. I do not. Would not look forward to replaying it if I went through the game again. Do not look forward to seeing people go through this on their first playthroughs of the game. Much more so look forward to them getting 2-1-4. A lot of people put this case up here, and I understand why. There's a lot of good to this case. Manfred von Karma is a great villain. Edgeworth also gets so much humanity in this case. This is basically two cases in one. Let's say that right now. Let's get that out of the way. This is basically two cases in one. This is the DL6 incident, and this is the case of the murder of Robert Hammond. And Manfred von Karma is the star of both of these, both halves of this case, even though the second half of the case is basically just the last court session, but you investigated enough up to that point. I think the case is paced well, but I think I do have more problems with this case than most people do on account of the fact that Lotta Hart is the worst witness for any game, any case on this list. This case introduces the worst witness in case solving. I am convinced. I hate Lotta Hart. That Gordy BS. We had to go around, deal with Larry. Larry was a plus. I liked Larry in this case. Usually when Larry shows up, that is a plus for me. I love the chaos that Larry brings. It always just adds this element of unpredictability and enjoyability. It's yo, what kind of bullshit is Larry gonna bring to the table this time? So I did like that the whole Gordy thing was, at the end of the day, a result of Larry. I think that made it a little more enjoyable, but I did not like running around investigating Gordy for the sake of Lotta. I also think that some of the DL6 investigating you did wasn't paced as well as the Robert Hammond murder of the case. I feel like the game was trying to establish that as part of the whole overarching case, but was introducing it a little too early. I feel like it would have been a bit more relevant to save some of those earlier bits with Marvin Grossberg until a bit later into the case. And I didn't like Yanni Yogi either. I don't like the parrot, really. Dealing with him and his snot bubble animation every time you were trying to present something was obnoxious. I didn't like that. I do think his story is sad. The part where his wife committed suicide and he named his parrot after her did hit home. That part worked for me, but playing along with his delusions and making him believe that you were a part of his family just felt stupid, and I didn't like it. And even more so when you realize, going back to this case after you already did it once, that it was all an act. I do think it's a great story. I think that him having to put on that act for years and that he wanted revenge on his own defense attorney that got him off the hook is like a really great story. But when you were playing as Phoenix Wright and actually investigating the case and whatnot, interacting with him was not fun. I didn't think so. And Lotta Hart was the other witness in this case. Not fun. I think that everything good in this case is basically in the last court day, with Edgeworth having to face his demons, you having to investigate the case from the past, you learning that Von Karma is the one responsible for basically everything. You did technically learn that earlier, but you exposing him as such. I think the final part where you bust out the metal detector and use it on him is a great climax to the game. But honestly, I do think this case is kind of a slog. Like, this case is mad important. This case is important to basically everything in Ace Attorney. And I think that it works better in some context than in others. Like, I honestly enjoy Miles Edgeworth 2-3 over this case in actuality, just because of dealing with Lotta Hart and Yanni Yogi takes up so much of the case. But even with them there, the court segments are made a lot more enjoyable by the fact that you're up against Von Karma, and it really does feel difficult. He makes it hard for you. Every time you try to press anything, that man has an objection ready in advance for anything that you may think to say or ask. The Larry, it's Christmas, but it's not Christmas BS was a lot of fun. Definitely more so than Lotta's foggy picture BS. I almost want to put it in C+. Like, I really do. Like, some people may think that that is like a disservice to what all that this case is, but really, Lotta Hart and Yanni Yogi and the Gordy BS and the earlier investigate, like all the investigations, really. The highlight of the investigations of this case is probably when Maya takes the stun gun for you. Maya has this whole arc during this case where she feels useless, which I think is BS, because Maya's the one who figures out about the parrot. Maya's the one who's able to communicate with the parrot. I got the question at the end of this case wrong, where you had to show her the bullet that she got taking the stun gun, because I thought it was the parrot. We were only able to solve the case because she was able to communicate with the parrot. She was also the one who jumped in and called out Lotta's BS testimony at the end of the first court day. So Maya does a lot in this case, and I'm not sure that her feelings of uselessness are all that justified. It's average. It's average. What else could I say? Like, Edgeworth, good. Von Karma, great. Larry, also good. But then you have like Lotta Hart, bad. Yanni Yogi, not fun. Unenjoyable investigations. I do like the Dick Gumshoe. I like how you learn a lot more about his relationship with Edgeworth in this case. You learn why he respects him so much. You learn about the working relationship he has with him. I don't think I could call it real solid overall. The highest I could do is bump it up to B, because there's twice as many good things as there is bad. Like, that's true, but the bad things are also there for just so much longer, except for Von Karma. Von Karma's great. I am gonna leave it an average. Like, I could put it up here above this case, but I think this case is paced a lot better. The investigations for this case just suck. They're just not fun. They're just not fun. Period. I actually did not think I would put this case that low when I made this list, but hey, that's what happens when you like actually sit down, talk things out, compare the good and the bad. Rise from the Ashes, the DLC case. Oh boy. The first thing that people say when they talk about this case is that this case is very long, and it's true, this case is very long. This case is like half of this whole game. It's like 2 or even 3 of these cases all together. But I think this case makes great use of its time, like a lot more so than this case does. This case gives you a lot of exposition in order for you to figure out the DL6 nonsense, but that's all backstory and not really relevant to the Robert Hammond actual murder on the boat physically that you're investigating. I think this case uses the SL9 incident, I believe, which also happened a long time ago, and I think that this case ties in what happened in the old case to the case that just happened, the death of Robert Goodman, a lot better than in this case. This case is longer, but this case does not feel padded at all. This case makes great use of its time. All 3 days feel completely necessary. Every character feels not only necessary, but integral, which I guess is a synonym for necessary, but it's not like a lot of heart BS, or even like Larry. Even though I like Larry in this case, he was like just there as like a BS out of left field thing to like give Phoenix the next day and say that the murder hadn't happened yet. I don't like Jake Marshall as a character, but there is no denying that his utilization was masterful. Angel Star utilized great. This case introduced Emma Skye, which actually became a really big character in the Apollo Justice trilogy. Despite the fact that this is DLC, this also serves as a great conclusion to what Edgeworth was going through this whole game, and a great setup to like what he comes to believe in and what he ends up behaving as when you meet him again in the second game. Everything that this case does is great. It's all great. And Damon Gant is probably the greatest of all. What a great villain! I love his theme song. It's a great meme. It's his swimming obsession. Just so memorable. The way he plays with his hair. His character design is great. Damon Gant is just such a great character. Don't even get me started on how we get him in the end with the evidence law and like the cloth and not presenting it, but then having him admit to the fact that he kept it in his safe and then presenting it. It's like probably one of the greatest ways that we get a villain in any of these cases. This case is so good. It might be hard to get lost at times, and this case also has Mike Meekins, which isn't very fun. I don't like Mike Meekins. But you know what I do like? The Blue Badger. Most people do not like the Blue Badger. I think it is hysterical. Great meme. Top tier meme material. Everyone's like going around doing crazy stuff in this case. I also think Lana Skye is by far the most interesting client in the whole first game, which is saying something considering that you have Maya as a client in this game, and you also have Edgeworth as a client in this game. I find Lana Skye refusing to like tell you the truth and keep insisting she did it more interesting than Edgeworth's backstory and the way where he like says he did it at the end of this case on the final day. I think Lana Skye's used real well, and the way that it ends is just so heartwarming. You feel real good about getting Lana off the hook and having her patch things up with her sister in a way that like you don't even feel that good when you get Maya off the hook. Like this case is great. This is like the only time where you play as young Phoenix like without Maya. I think that might not be true actually. Maybe I have to like look over some of these cases. We'll get there as we go. But this case, it's at least S. It might even be SS. I don't really can think of like a single thing that I really don't like. You could argue, yeah, you go back and forth talking to people a lot in the investigations, but I feel like all that stuff is so interesting. Like Angel Star going around the whole like thing and up the fence and figuring out that like Edgeworth was writing his letter of resignation, and then you have Damon Gant doing all sorts of weird sus crap. It's just great. It's just great all around. Even though I don't really like Jake Marshall as a character, I don't really like talking to Jake Marshall, I guess. It's like the only downside to this case. I don't feel like the length is at all a detriment. I feel like having more of a case this good is a great thing. It takes a while, yes, but this case is great. I was gonna put it in S, but I can't think of any reason to not put it in SS, like at all, like not a real reason. This case is great. What a great way to end the first game. I'm so glad that they came back and made this case when they remade the first Phoenix Wright for the DS or whenever it was that they added it as DLC. The mini games are also fun. Like this case had like case-specific mechanics. The luminol, the fingerprinting, all that crap was fun. That's fun, man. Like the Gant 7777BS, we didn't have real proof for that. That was just masterfully implemented where you as the player thought, okay, that's Gant's number, but you couldn't prove it because you couldn't get access to like the police files and whatnot, and then you had a safe in his room, and you're like, let's try that number, and then you try it. That's not technically concrete proof, but it is a way that you are able to figure out and conclude that that is Gant's number going into the evidence room. The video, the first use of 3D models in the series, when you have Jake Marshall dressing up as Bruce Goodman and stabbing Meekins, that crap was hilarious. And some people say, oh, I hate looking at that video over and over and over and over again. I think that's effing funny, bro. That crap was fun. That's fun, man. That's just good fun. What else? I have a feeling like I'm not even done yet. I feel like there's something else I'm forgetting about this case. Jake Marshall not knowing how the fingerprints work was hilarious. This case also has little Easter eggs in it. How you get to see a picture of Maggie Bird in Gumshoe's locker, even though you don't know who she is yet. You see the bug detector from like Ace Attorney 2-4 that Gumshoe shows you, and he says it'll be a great case one of these days. Just these little nods to things in the future that you're not gonna know unless you come back and play the case again after you already played through Ace Attorney 2. I also think this is a much better way for Edgeworth to hit the lower valley of his arc than this was, where Edgeworth is just being constantly not only bombarded with allegations, but with being held directly accountable for mistakes made in the case. Like when Mike Meekins delivers the report and he refuses to see it because it's not related to the case that he's investigating, but he would have if he would have just opened it. You see that, and you see him taking consequences from it. It's not like in this case where he just talks about what happened before and then you piece it together after the fact, and Gumshoe is just telling you about rumors and whatnot. You see that stuff happen in this case. It's great. It's just great. And I still feel like there's things that I'm forgetting. I've talked about this case enough, but I'm like, there's still things that I'm forgetting that just make this case amazing and fun and great. Him as a great assistant, it is an unparalleled masterpiece. It really is. No questions asked. But the real question is, should we go straight on to Ace Attorney 2, or should we talk about a different game? I think we should talk about a different game. I think we should talk about Danganronpa 1, because even though Ace Attorney 1-1 was technically the first case I ever played, it was on DS, and then I didn't play any more of it. Like, Danganronpa 1 was the first real case-solving game that I got into, and since we're basically talking about beginnings right now, I think that it makes sense to go into Danganronpa 1 next. And my god, did Danganronpa 1 start off effing strong. Danganronpa 1-1 was masterfully paced, a great introduction to the series. I stood up this whole trial. I could not sit down because I was so on edge. This was such a great intro. I mean, yes, I technically played this game first on DS, but let's be real. This was my introduction to case solving as a genre, as a kind of game. You could say if this case wasn't very good, I probably wouldn't have liked these kinds of games enough to play all these games, to play all these cases. This case was so good. The eerie way that this game eases you into the atmosphere and to the situation that Makoto finds himself in is so good. And the way that it slowly introduces you to Sayaka and like connects you to Sayaka, makes you want to hang out with Sayaka, it worked for me. I thought Sayaka was best girl, like, immediately. I wanted to hang out with Sayaka more. I wanted to talk with Sayaka. I'm like, okay, Sayaka, like, I hadn't played, like, Phoenix Wright yet, but I was basically in the mindset, okay, Sayaka is our Maya. And I love that, because this game did a great job of making me really like Sayaka. I still think Sayaka is like the best girl in Danganronpa 1. Top 3 girls in Danganronpa overall. Her little psychic, like I'm psychic thing is so cute. And I still remember with such clarity the exchange that she has with Makoto right before she dies, where she says, "What if I'm not psychic?" And that's like the first inkling that you get that she's finally starting to open up to you. I don't know if that makes sense narratively, but I felt that so much. Maybe it was because my emotions were so on edge because of the situation. I'd never played a game like this before. I don't read mystery novels. I don't watch that kind of movie. I was feeling emotionally like really invested, and when Sayaka was like, "Let's switch rooms," and I could tell they're setting someone up to die. Like Sayaka's probably gonna get accused of murder or something like that. Like it was so unnerving. Like I was feeling exactly how the developers wanted me to. Like, I'm convinced very strongly. And when you woke up the next day and went into your room and you saw that it, like, my heart was going a mile a minute, it was awful. And then you saw she was dead. Bro, I was heartbroken. It was like, I was so in sync with Makoto, and that's just leading up to the first murder specifically. That's not even talking about how great this game sets up the atmosphere. I think Danganronpa 1 has the best atmosphere of any Danganronpa game. The fact that there is no sunlight at all in Danganronpa 1 just lends to the atmosphere and the feeling so well. And I think that you slowly start to get in the characters' minds throughout the course of this first chapter, because everyone's dreading the first murder. It's this feeling of anticipation that you never get again, because Danganronpa 2 and 3 try to do something like unique and different, and it's just not the same as how this chapter made you feel leading up to the first murder. And it's the murder of the character that I grew to love, and that the game did a perfect job of attaching me to. The Monokuma motives, oh man, it's like, even just talking about it, I'm freaking out about it. And this is all not even getting to the trial. The fact that Sayaka was murdered, like, could be argued to put this above 95% of Ace Attorney, just by itself. But also, then Junko dies, which at the time was my second favorite girl in the game. Literally, first time I played through this game, I hung out with Sayaka twice and maxed her out, and hung out with Junko once. And then they killed Sayaka and immediately killed Junko. I can't tell you how much this game seemed to target me and, like, understand what I did not want to happen. That Monokuma is such an asshole, and I feel like Monokuma was just so well written in this game. Monokuma isn't this great ever again. Ever. I loved how it felt just talking to Monokuma. Like, his personality was just so masterfully done in this first game. The roller coaster of emotions you could feel listening to this character talk, like in the entrance when you all first arrive, and then even like when he's talking like after Sayaka dies and when Junko steps on him and kills her, and explaining how the class trial is, like, Monokuma, I will remember the feelings Monokuma speaking invested in me until the day I die. Then you get into the investigation. But bro, this was my first real investigation, because the only other case I'd played before was this case, and this case had no investigation. My mind was thinking up all kinds of crazy crap. I was doing the most crazy theories, bro. I'm one of the few people who did not see Leon upside down in the shower. I did not, period. All the way up until when Kyoko said turn the image 180 degrees. That crap blew my mind. I did not see it, and I don't know how, because all my senses were on such strong alert because of what this game was doing to my emotions. And the investigation felt so pressured at the time because Monokuma had the ability to just say that your investigation's over, time's up, time for the trial, whenever he wanted. So, like, I felt the need to absorb everything that I was seeing at the time. Like, oh my god. Like, masterfully done introduction. I think this case is absolutely great. We haven't even talked about the trial yet. The trial is admittedly pretty easy, especially in the beginning. I think that this is a much easier beginning to the game for getting through the trial than this is. I had like no trouble getting through this trial in the beginning, even though I didn't see Leon upside down, which, by the way, just added to how great this felt when there were so many people still alive. There was like, what, counting yourself, 13 people still alive, and I had no idea who did it? It was just this crazy trial, just seeing everyone talk, looking at each other. This feeling of doubt and distrust and your ability to just see everyone talk, and you're like, why would they say that? Are they lying? Like, someone in here is a murderer. Someone. And this is all amplified 15 billion times over by the fact that the trial, all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, was fully voice acted. I can't put into words how big of a boon this was for the feelings and emotions during the trial. Like I said, I was standing up the whole trial because I was like that invested. I was that hyped. It was so good. Like, none of the rest of these games do this. Even Genshin Impact with its full voice acting, you, Aether, are not voiced. I guess Raincode's voice acted because it's the like successor to Danganronpa, but whatever. Ace Attorney, Tyrone Cuthbert, Aviary Attorney, like, none of that crap's voiced. And oh my god, does this case show just how strongly of an impact the voice acting during the trial, when you're actually working together and doubting each other and proving each other wrong, how strongly that can drive home what the characters are feeling, man. Yasuhiro, the sword-based sneak attack, proving that wrong, proving Celeste wrong when she said that someone must have put her there to like erase traces that she'd ever been in Makoto's room when they were wiping up the hair or whatever. In hindsight, and like upon a second playthrough, when you try to analyze these things, it's not that big of a deal. It's really not. But even on like recurring playthroughs, it still feels like it because of how the game presents it. This first case, I will never feel like this again, ever. And when I was like learning that Leon did it, and when I like was recognizing he killed Sayaka, and I was going in on him because like all of a sudden I felt this hatred building in me for this character because he killed my girl, my waifu Sayaka, and you just go in on him until he finally breaks. And then you realize it's not really a good thing because Montezuma's about to kill this man, and you get this really unnerving, uncomfortable feeling because you kinda just sentenced this man to death in a way. Leon's execution is probably the most brutal you get out of both of the first two Danganronpa games. I know this crap had to be censored on TV in Japan. That crap was intense. There was just so many mixed feelings because you did that to someone. You did that because you ousted him as the killer. And Sayaka, like, we haven't even talked about how Sayaka was the one who wanted to kill him, but you can't feel bad for him because of what he did. Even if you don't like Sayaka, he went out of his way to go back to his room and get a knife and come back and kill her. Although I don't see how anyone could not like Sayaka. But Leon just evokes so much conflicting feelings and emotions. And he's also a great meme. It's Leon! It's one of my favorite memes of all time. But even that's not all. At the end of the case, when you're talking with Kyoko and the game is starting to establish Kyoko as basically your new Sayaka, and Makoto says, in response to Kyoko saying, how did you know I wanted to talk to you, what I wanted to talk to you about? And Makoto says, I'm psychic. And then it fades to black, and he just says, kidding, I have really good intuition. I fell to my knees in real life. Oh my god, masterfully done, Case. This taught me what despair was. Truly. It is an SS tier case. Definitely. Definitely. No questions asked. I will never feel like this again. And you know what? I don't want to feel like this again. Because this case is special in a way no other will be. This case was an unparalleled masterpiece. That's the words for it. And then you have Danganronpa 1-2. A Boy's Life of Despair, I think it's called. I think really highly of this case. And that's because a lot of the cases in Danganronpa 1 are pretty easy to figure out in hindsight. I wasn't very good at these games when I started Danganronpa 1, and I'm really glad I was not. Because if I had Ace Attorney experience under my belt, none of this would have hit as hard as it did, because I wasn't good at solving cases yet. I couldn't figure any of this crap out. But I do think that this is the hardest case to find out the culprit for, and I think that that's a really good thing. So let's analyze the case from the beginning. You're fresh off of feeling everything that this case made you feel. And like, you have this new area to explore, and that's another thing Danganronpa does, is like every chapter you get new areas, and it gives each stage of the game a unique feeling. And I know that Ace Attorney and basically every other game does this too, where with each chapter you get new locations. There's just something about literally unlocking them by doing the past case in Danganronpa that feels so unique and special. Going up, seeing the pool. By the way, why the F is there a pool on the second floor? Like, bruh? What? That is wild. But this is when you start to see a lot of the characters begin to start down their paths of character development. This is when you start to see Byakuya break off from the group and start to do his own thing. This is when you start to see Toko lose it. That's elaborated a lot on later down the line in this chapter when you get to the Genocide Jack stuff. And of course, you have probably the focus of the chapter, which is Mondo and Taka's whole confrontation in the bathhouse, and then they become friends after. And there's just all these events going on, and characters doing different things, and it can be really hard to keep track of not only just what everyone's doing, but how everyone is feeling. You start to see your first signs of hints as to the overarching plot in this game when you get to like see the letter from the headmaster in the library and all that. Chihiro obviously does his thing where he says he's weak and he'd like to become stronger. I also think the motive is very interesting. When Monokuma revealed the motive, but like no one besides you wanted to talk about it, that immediately like threw up a red flag for me, because I'm like, uh-oh, crap's going down, man. It's just like further escalations and building upon, like perfectly building upon the intense atmosphere and environment and situation that was established in the first case. This case is a great continuation of all that. The murder was effing crazy. I think that Byakuya's involvement and the Genocide Jack like reveal, I do think that you, the player, learn about it a little too early. I wish that it was harder to figure out than just seeing Toko basically admit it in her room during the investigation. Makoto, being the dumbass he is, says, what was that all about? Just say Jack got a killer? Like, no, you idiot. Working with Byakuya during the investigation is fun. I definitely enjoyed that. I like Byakuya as a character overall in this case. I think it's a great case for Byakuya. Genocide Jack getting revealed during the trial, to say it did a lot for Toko's character is an understatement, because Toko obviously was not the killer and she stuck around. And then you had just another wild card thrown into like all the interactions and everything going on from this case forward. But even her debut in this case was absolutely crazy, with no one wanting to believe her because she was a serial killer and whatnot. And because of how Byakuya effed with the crime scene, it was so difficult to figure out who could have done it. Hyoko's random effing hunch based on how Mondo had changed referring to Chihiro as a dude, I didn't catch it, and I haven't seen anyone else catch it either. In like all the Let's Plays and like all my friends who I've introduced to this game, it's a minor thing, yeah, but I think that it gives such a great air of mystery to this case, because this is the hardest it gets for Danganronpa 1 in figuring out who the killer is. I definitely felt bad for Chihiro, because, spoiler alert, after both Junko and Sayaka died, I fell for the trap and thought Chihiro was a girl, and thought Chihiro was best girl. It wasn't, she wasn't a girl, it was a guy. And I got BM'd by figuring out that he was a guy, of course. That's all just to say that Chihiro's death hit home for me again and continued the feeling of me feeling as though this game was just hard targeting me as a person. I felt that Mondo was a good killer. Him snapping in the moment, you might say, that's like not of strong motivation. I feel that. I felt Mondo's mindset. It really made sense to me. It clicked with me. I liked Mondo as a killer even more than I liked Leon as a killer. But you're not really supposed to like Leon as a killer like that. Like, I feel like they did a great job of Leon conveying these conflicting feelings to you. I guess everyone in Danganronpa is supposed to do that, but Mondo felt much more solid as a killer from the motivation standpoint, even though it was a heat of the moment thing. And Taka just snapping after his execution was kind of just heartbreaking. His execution is kind of whack. I can say that. I don't know how much the execution should really affect the ranking in the list, but there was a lot of events going on during this case. Like, investigating the Genocide Jack murders with Byakuya in the secret room in the library was adrenaline pumping when you, like, Byakuya was telling you, like, haha, you see that assassination report, it won't be declassified for another 20 years. You sure you want to look at that? I was having fun. It's just good fun. Danganronpa is such an enjoyable experience, man. I like a lot of what this case does. A lot. I like how hard it is to figure out the killer. The death did hit hard. Execution kinda whack, not gonna lie. I like what they did with Byakuya. I like what they did with Toko. It's great that Toko got to stick around after her identity as Genocide Jack was revealed. I do think that it would have been better if it was harder to figure out who Genocide Jack was, and Byakuya calling out that Genocide Jack was the killer as early as he did in the trial did make it obvious, even to me as an inexperienced player, that Toko was not the one who did it. But Byakuya turned out to be even more of a wild card in this case, and overall I like everything that this chapter did. Like everything, all of it. What this character sets Taka up for in the next chapter, sets like Byakuya and Toko up for the rest of the game. Every character that this chapter heavily involves, I think, is dealt with really, really well. Would I call it an unparalleled masterpiece? I don't think so. It's not like just outright phenomenal like these two are, but it is phenomenal. It is near flawless. Very minor things, like Genocide Jack should have been like revealed a little later. Byakuya should have called that out a little later, but there's a lot going on, and basically everything that goes on I really like. S tier. Alright, had to stop for the day, take care of some stuff. I'm back a couple days later, ready to continue on ranking these cases. Got my Miles Edgeworth, You Are the Entire Circus shirt on. I'm ready, bro. I'm ready. So we're gonna pick up right where we left off. We're picking up with Danganronpa 1 Case 3. So Danganronpa 1, like, to me personally, all the best stuff is at the beginning, and you'll notice that I think that this game slowly falls off more and more as it goes on. This was the first case where I did not care about the victims, in the sense that, like, I was not, like, emotionally devastated when they died. Like, when Sayaka died, I was a wreck. I was really sad when Chihiro died. That crap hit hard. Hifumi and Taka, I'm like, bro, what the F, man? I mean, one could say that at least one of them dying was predictable because of what was happening in this chapter. All the alter ego nonsense that they were, like, fighting over. I did think that that was used well to build up the tension and create conflict between the characters, using this alter ego Chihiro not only as a plot device to move the main plot forward, but also to cause conflict between the characters. And like Taka went through like his own crazy arc becoming Super Saiyan because of what alter ego was able to do with Mondo, and you could argue that Hifumi did the same thing. But I didn't feel like there was as much going on leading up to the murder of this case like there was for either of these cases. And while I didn't actually care about Hifumi or Taka dying specifically, I will say that the investigation of this case was an absolute adrenaline roller coaster. Seeing the freaking dude like doing shit like with the justice hammers, and you had to go back and forth chasing people. People were saying they were seeing crap. That day when the murders happened and you were chasing that guy everywhere was absolutely crazy. That was a great experience, and I wish I could experience that again, because just chasing Robo Justice around was so freaking fun. It was so funny. It's just this robot going around. No one can catch him. Everything's going on everywhere. Like, people were getting attacked. Celeste and Hifumi were both getting attacked. Hifumi dying in the nurse's office. Just a whole bunch of crazy crap going on all at once. I just thought it was hysterical. I loved that bit. Probably the highlight of the case for me. This is often talked about as probably the case where the killer is like among the easiest to figure out in Danganronpa 1, unless you see Leon written on the letters, which I did not. Because, let's be honest, Celeste does act very differently throughout the course of this investigation than she had like leading up to this point. Her pushing to like accuse Hiro was unnatural, but I was trying to think about it logically and not just use the attitudes of people as evidence, so I actually did not figure out that it was Celeste until the trial. I actually, personally, when I first played through this case, I thought that it was Sakura, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I can't figure out the evidence, right? So let's think about this logically. The only way someone could have moved Hifumi from the first to the second floor in that time is if they were super buff. And so I just thought Sakura did it, which was of course obviously wrong. But Hiro in this case at least is probably the biggest red herring in the Danganronpa like franchise, the most obvious one. It's obvious that it isn't Hiro. It's even more obvious that it's not Hiro when you get to the trial and Celeste immediately accuses him. Celeste pushing from the get-go kind of made me feel like very, very early in the trial that I figured that she had done it. That sort of took away some of the fun of solving it. It did blow my mind when it was revealed that Hifumi was still alive and had like walked upstairs himself. I did not see that coming. That just wasn't even a factor in my mind. I was not thinking about that. But there was a lot of going on in the timeline of these murders, and when you really think about it, a lot of the stuff that Celeste was claiming just didn't make sense. And once you realize that, like, figuring this case out was relatively simple. It was probably the easiest case, like, of the first 4 cases, which I think are the only ones that really count, because those are the only murders in this game. Figuring out this case was probably the easiest of the 4 for me, and I don't like that. I like to be mentally challenged. I like it when I have to really think hard and try to figure out how stuff happened. I like it when things are crazy and complicated. Even if you, like, step into the realm of convoluted, generally speaking, that's the sort of thing I like. So this being the most simplistic one didn't really work for me. I also don't think that the alter ego buildup was as entertaining as anything from the first 2 cases. Celeste dying did hit me a little hard. I didn't really like Celeste that much when I first played through the game, but she's really grown on me over the years, and nowadays I would say that Celeste would be the best girl in Danganronpa 1 were it not for Sayaka. So naturally, of course, that means that the game had to kill her. Her execution, it's better than Mondo's. It's also very symbolic. I thought it was nice. I wouldn't put it like in the upper echelon if we were ranking executions, but I think that it matched the tone of the case very well. I also think the quality of the execution is comparable to the quality of the case. I do think it's overall real solid. I don't think that I have to necessarily care about the victims in order for the case to be good. I also don't think the executions for Danganronpa cases should be used to like heavily weight them or anything like that. The trial itself was pretty easy to like sift through and figure out. I don't think I really got stuck anywhere in the trial. I could bump it down to like good, like fairly decent, but the thing is this investigation, to me at least, was crazy. And just like chasing Robo Justice around was such a memorable experience. It's just such a positive experience looking back. Even now, every time I like think back to chasing that man around, I just effing smile and laugh. It's just giddy. It just makes me giddy. It's just fun. It is no doubt, however, and like, you can't talk about this case and not mention this, right? About how disappointing Celeste is as a killer to figure out, considering the fact that she is the ultimate gambler. You would think that she would be much better at this. Mondo was better at this than her. Leon was better at this than her. So like, that aspect of it is real disappointing, yeah. Dang, I forgot about that. I think taking that into consideration, I have to bump it down a tier. Like, it's good, it's fairly decent. I had a lot of fun during the investigation of this case, but like, the build-up leading up to the investigation just wasn't as good as up here, and the trial also was not as good as these 2 either. I've been thinking a lot about my rankings of the previous cases over the last couple days in between, like, when I ranked them and, like, now. And, like, I've just been trying to find an excuse to bump this case up, honestly, because I know a lot of people like this case and it's a very important case, but it just wasn't it for me, so it's staying where it is. This case might go up to meh. We'll see. I think we have to flesh out what the lower half of the list looks like first, because I'm not gonna lie, I like almost every, like, I talked about this already, but I like all of these. to some extent. Like, almost all of them. I actually do enjoy just playing through in their entirety. So I don't really know what sort of standard I have for down here. So we'll see as we go. Next, we have the Sakura case. All-Star Apologies, I think this chapter was called. This is the case where tensions between people really started to increase. You had Byakuya talking like an absolute madman leading up to this murder. He was talking like he could potentially be more dangerous than Monokuma, like debatably. It's like when you're playing as Yugi and like Kaiba can sometimes be a bigger obstacle than Merrick or something like that. I think Byakuya and Kaiba are very comparable. Like, let's be honest. I'm not sure how much I really like the whole like traitor concept in Danganronpa. Like, I don't really know if I like how it's used. I do think it's used better here than in Danganronpa 2 because the concept of Chiaki being like a traitor is just like debatable inherently. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. I do think that it's done better with Sakura, but I do think that using that as the motive is probably the weakest motive so far. I loved the motive here. I really liked the motive here. And honestly, as standard as it is, I even think the money motive here was also like strong one on Monokuma's part. He got the dough to do shit like that. But just ousting Sakura as the killer, not only did it like make it real obvious who was going to die before it happened, but it just would have been so easy to just talk things out. Hina was on her side. If it wasn't for like Byakuya just being a dick specifically, this whole situation could have even just been diffused. This hero's just a dumbass, and Toko is like sort of just a meme at this point in time because of how she went back and forth with Genocide Jack. But of course, Sakura died, so I do think the layers upon layers of deception that the developers put into this investigation were really well done. Like, everyone was involved in this death, like, somehow. And it really threw me for a loop. Of course, you figure out later that she committed suicide. And while that was, like, an inkling in my mind throughout playing this case, I didn't actually think that was what happened. There were so many red herrings that I thought, okay, one of these red herrings has to be the actual murder disguised as a red herring, right? Because there was so much going on in the room where she died, and I really liked this investigation. This investigation was really fun to go through, and I'm really glad that I didn't figure out that it was a suicide early on, because I think that would have taken a lot of the fun out of it for me. I think that going into the trial, I was under the assumption that Byakuya was the murderer. I wasn't sure. I thought it could have been Hiro. Like when the trial went into it and we immediately established like the first thing is that Hiro thought he did it, but then it was revealed that he didn't actually do it. I thought the trial could come full circle after that and reveal that no, he actually did do it. But that didn't happen. I didn't think it was Toko or Genocide Jack, of course. Like I said, like figuring like what happened in that room layer by layer was really enjoyable. And we also have to talk about how this is the chapter that Byakuya finally gets humbled. That felt good. And I'm not gonna lie, after Byakuya drank from that bottle of protein powder and then it was revealed that he didn't actually know what was going on, I freaked out because I thought Byakuya did actually drink poison because he was just that confident that it wasn't actually poison. But of course I just wasn't following like the strand of logic that well at the time, and that just didn't happen at all. I do think Hina's motivations are kind of whack in this case. Like, I understand how she's very distraught. I understand how she like is in this mindset where she just hates everyone there. She was gonna like kill Makoto and like Kyoko because like she just felt that like, I don't like it. No, I don't like Hina in this case, which is unfortunate because Hina is like the star of this case. This case has like all of Hina's character development. Like her relationship with Sakura was established as early on as like this, or no, it was established in the first case. Hina and Sakura like slept in the same room or something, but we didn't really get much else from Hina at all until this case, and I don't like how those motivations of hers were kind of just like the logic behind them was not sound, to say the least. But I think this is a great case for Byakuya. I also think that this is a great case for Kyoko. We get Kyoko progressively more and more throughout the game. I don't really like Kyoko as a character. I would think I actually would have liked the game a lot better if Sayaka had stuck with us all game. But Kyoko gets progressively better and better throughout like all the cases leading up to the final case. And Kyoko had a lot of time to shine and just absolutely humiliate Byakuya in this trial, which was fun. I didn't know what was going on at this point in time. Once Byakuya was revealed and he didn't know what was going on, I'm like, well, I definitely don't know what's going on, man. Probably the weakest build-up portion of the game. Like, this chapter probably has the weakest portion of the chapter leading up to the murder than anything that came before. But I think the investigation was pretty good. I don't think it was on the tier of anything else, but the trial was definitely way better than Celeste's trial. I thought it was cool at the end how Byakuya said he was bowing out. Sakura's note being able to unite everyone is kind of whack when you realize that the only reason it was able to do that is because Monokuma read it out loud like a dumbass. The alter ego execution didn't hit for me at all. I felt no emotional attachment to that character at all, so that fell flat. I think overall, it's another good, fairly decent case. It's another B tier case. I do like the Celeste investigation more, just slightly more. And the Celeste buildup is also better, but the Sakura trial blows this one out of the water. Like, each of these cases have like minor things that just aren't that great. Like the alter ego execution falling flat here, Celeste acting super obvious from the start of the trial here, and the obvious hero red herring. But it's good, it's fairly decent. I like going through this case. Kind of makes me mad when I see people like go through these cases, like when I watch Let's Plays and how easy it is for them to figure it out, and I just like overthought everything and just haven't come to a single correct conclusion throughout the entirety of Danganronpa 1. But like, as you can see, I think real highly of Danganronpa 1. Like, everything in the game so far is like B or high. And don't get me wrong, like, I could go through a B tier case like 15 billion times. I love like all of these cases. Even this case I could go through a lot, right? I think that this tier is where the cases start that I never get tired of like going back through it like at all. Which is important to clarify because the next case we have to talk about is Danganronpa 1-5. The game dropped the ball on this one, to say the least. It is no exaggeration when I say that this case is the weakest point for all of Danganronpa, like all three games. From the beginning, this chapter shows you the picture of the masked person, like, dead and murdered in the garden. Why? Why does it do that? Does the game not feel like you're gonna be excited enough to play through the chapter enough to get to that point? No, okay, it ruins it immediately by spoiling that, which already hinders going into this. But also, the tension isn't really there because of how Sakura unified everyone at the end of this case. You really don't feel like anyone's gonna murder anyone else again. Which is true because it just doesn't happen. After this case, no one else kills anyone all game. But I don't think this case is very strong anyway, even without the spoiler at the beginning. The Makoto sickness to act as a plot device, I think, is kind of weak. And then it just magically disappears the next day when the devs need it to. Literally everybody except Makoto and Kyoko having an alibi for the murder takes a lot of the suspicions and problem-solving elements out of trying to actually solve the quote-unquote murder. It is kind of cool how you don't know who this person is and how Monokuma's still walking around, so it can't be the mastermind. So like, is it Mukuro Ikusaba? That's the only person it could be, right? Because Mukuro is a 16 student somewhere in the school. The highlight of this case is probably when you take apart Monokuma and then bust into the headmaster's room and you figure out that, like, this is being broadcast on TV and your mind starts working. You're like, what does that mean? What's going on? This crap's effed up! And then, like, Hiro's like, I don't know what it means. And Monokuma's like, me neither, or something like that. And you're like, whoa! And that is probably the best part of the case. Kyoko is just sus this whole case for no reason. This investigation is also kind of whatever, because you're just thinking, okay, could it be Kyoko or could it not? Because you're playing as Makoto, so you know it's not you. And everyone else has this, like, super strong alibi, so it couldn't have been anyone else. So there's not a lot of, like, critical thinking going on during the investigation of this case. And it's not like going into the investigation even hits you that hard because you already saw the picture of the guy dead at the beginning of the case. It is kind of funny when the body explodes and Toko gets sent flying back. But compared to some of the, like, all the adrenaline pumping moments of every case that came before, that just doesn't hold up. I think the only point of this case that really gets me going is when you're in the headmaster's room investigating, because you're like, is he dead? We're not supposed to be in here. If we get found, we're effing dead, bro. But then you get found and you don't die or anything like that, and Monokuma doesn't even seem to care that you broke into the room or anything like that. So the build-up is kind of lame. The use of Makoto's cold is contrived. You do get a pretty hype moment before the investigation starts, but then the investigation starts and it almost feels like you're being taken out of the action because that crap of exploring the headmaster's room is just so much more exciting than investigating this seemingly random person's murder for which there's only one suspect that you even have in mind. Box 16 debuts in this case though, which is absolutely amazing, but I don't think I can give this case that much credit just for use of that song other than first impressions. It left a strong first impression. I was rocking out during this investigation, but I can't give it too many points for that, no. So the investigation is lame as well. And then the case happens, and it's lame too. I'm gonna be honest. You immediately jump into this trial with having to prove to Hiro that Kyoko is not a ghost, which is effing stupid. I couldn't believe I was doing this the first time I played through it. And you're kind of just trying to prove that it wasn't you the whole time. The infamous sprinkler moment too, when he is talking about like 5:30, rejecting that point is like one of the most BS rejections in all of Danganronpa. Using the sprinkler time, I still remember that. It's been years since I played. It's been like over 5 years since I played this game for the first time. I still remember how bullshit refuting that argument was. Kyoko just attacks you relentlessly throughout this case as well, and not only does it make her seem super sus, but it also seems out of character, and you just don't want to help her after like what she does here in this case. The bad ending is probably worth noting because unlike a lot of other bad endings, this bad ending you can get in this case does funnel directly back into the choice, so you can get the bad ending without having to load anything, and I do think that's good. I think that like bad endings that are done that way are like really good. I do enjoy that. The bad ending's also decently funny, but Monokuma rushing the verdict is like I think this is like the only time in like all these cases where you have to intentionally not expose the truth, except for in Gant's case, and I feel like it's done way better there. There's real actual logic behind that, whereas here it's just like, oh, I trust Kyoko, I shouldn't expose the truth. Alter Ego saving you from the execution is a pretty poggers moment, but it's not a super hype crazy moment or anything like that, or at least I don't think. Not only does Monokuma rush the ending of this trial, but the trial concludes in a rushed sort of way. Like, it feels rushed. Like, not like because Monokuma's rushing it, but it doesn't like conclude in a satisfactory way. And I know that's intentional because this funnels directly into the last case. But all in all, this case is not a satisfying experience at all. I'd rather go through this case any day of the week, any week of the month, and it's sad because look at how good the rest of Danganronpa 1 does. This is an outright bad case. Like, I'd be fine never playing this case again. I'd be fine skipping this case every time I go through Danganronpa 1. I do think this is just outright bad, almost nothing redeeming about it. Like I said, it's cool when you break into the headmaster's room and explore in there. That's about it. That's like all the positives that this case really has to offer. But that's because this is just part 1 of the Mukuro Ikusawa murder investigation. You actually conclude it when you're investigating in the last case of Danganronpa 1. Where is it? There it is. Danganronpa 1-6. So figuring out that Junko was the sus death is pretty easy, right? But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. Kyoko saving you from the trash is cool. I think that a lot of the revelations she tells you when you're escaping together are pretty interesting. I didn't really like Kyoko as a character, as I've mentioned before. I was not that invested in Kyoko as a character, but she's mad important. And I think that what she tells you while you're escaping the trash to shoot together is good stuff. Striking a plea deal with Monokuma is high stakes. It's interesting to watch Makoto and Kyoko do that. This man literally had the means to murder us at any given point in time for surviving the execution. But let's be honest, this case has a lot to unpack. Like, a lot. The investigation is all over the place, both in terms of what you're doing and in terms of quality. It may go without saying, but I don't think any of the time you're investigating the death of Masked Man is really all that interesting. Finding Kyoko's dad's body in that box is pretty like, whoa. Whoa, that's crazy, man. You find the hero's notebook in the locker, and it slowly, like, gets revealed more and more that you have had classes there, and, like, everyone just forgot. The game was trying to present this as everyone else lying to you and saying that they didn't remember when they actually did, but I don't know if anyone I've ever met who bought that from the game. It was very obviously memory manipulation. I do think it was interesting, but I don't think it was nearly as difficult to figure out as the game wanted it to. I think Danganronpa has this interestingly strange bad habit of the big reveals at the end being the easiest to figure out of anything in the whole game. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't even know to this day. I don't even know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know how the characters are stupid enough to buy, like, the Monokuma picture things as evidence that everyone else is working together. I think that's really silly, and it's just more evidence for the players who are thinking logically to say, okay, it's been like memory manipulation or something. Like, part of me was thinking like alternate dimensions or some crazy crap when we were getting pictures starting in this case of characters hanging out from back during like their school days at Hope's Peak Academy. I was thinking like maybe we're in like a simulation. I was thinking too far ahead. I was in the Danganronpa 2 mentality, and I'm like, oh, maybe we're in a simulation, and now that they died, they got out, and now they're like, oh, hey, we didn't actually die. How about that? Life's good. That's the sort of thoughts that were going through my mind when I played this case. I'm like, is it just like a simulation, or are we just like in an experiment, and we're just gonna let go as soon as we think that we die or something like that? But that was not the case. I do think that the first part of the trial, the part where you figure this crap out, went on a little too long. I think that that could have been condensed a little bit. Figuring out it was Junko was interesting. I thought it was possible that it could still be Mukuro for a minute, but no, it's not that hard to figure out. Dang, I really just can't get over the fact, like, looking at these cases in hindsight, how much more prepared I was for what was actually gonna happen in this case than anything else. This case's revelations, like, not counting this, which didn't really have revelations at all. This case's revelations were probably the most expected out of any of the rest of these cases so far. Junko being alive, Junko is a great villain. Like, Junko's whole motivation, I think, works really well. She was just born being evil, and there's just nothing you can do about it. It takes balls to make your main villain's motivations that simplistic. Like, it's just, no, I'm just evil from birth. I hated everything. Despair, baby. It takes balls to do that. And I think that Junko makes it work really, really well. I loved Junko, like, as the final villain. I do think that Danganronpa final cases also have the problem of the main villain just expositioning a bunch of crap. You have to figure out surprisingly little of it. Junko tells you just so much. But there's no denying that, like, figuring out the world is just being destroyed by Monokumas and Byakuya's family that he's, like, prided himself on is already dead, and all that stuff is crazy. That stuff did hit, don't get me wrong, but I also think that, like, after all Junko has done, like, it was surprisingly easy to win, you know? Just say, no, I want to just go out there and figure it out for myself. And she basically just loses. And then she kills herself, because that's what she agreed upon or whatever. I like Byakuya in this case. I like Hina in this case. This is Kyoko's case to shine, let's be honest. You get the thing about, like, the scars on her hands. You get basically everything about her father in this case. And even for someone like me who didn't really like Kyoko, I thought it was interesting. I do think it's kind of lame that the execution at the end is just like everyone else's combined. I thought that, like, the Despair Goddess should have, like, her own special execution. I do think that was kind of disappointing. And to this day, I still don't know how I feel about not being shown anything about what happens when you open the door at the end of the game. You do get to see it in the Danganronpa 3 anime, like the moment that happens. I think that's really cool. And I think of the Danganronpa 3 anime as like a much higher quality piece of media than most other people in the fandom do. But for the game's ending specifically, when Danganronpa 1 was just the only thing that there was, and that was how the game ended, I still don't know if I like that or if I don't. For like the last thing that happens in the game, you know? I think that the biggest problem with Danganronpa 1-6 is that there's just so much fluff here. So much Junko exposition. Like, that could have been gameplay of us figuring things out. And the gameplay that there is a lot of times just effing stupid. Sometimes the stuff that you have to figure out is just super, super obvious. And sometimes it feels like the characters are intentionally stupid in this case, to the point of you just having to figure out every little detail. When they were talking about how they saw Junko get killed with spears right after you told them how that wasn't actually Junko. Moments like that, just like, even though it's the finale of the game, this still felt longer than what it needed to be for what happens in it. I do think that the overall theming of this is really good. Like I said, I like Junko as a villain, and I also like how you've all been killing and whatnot to get out of this place when you were the ones who put yourself in there. I think that's great use of irony, and I also think that, like, you're trying to escape to a world that's already been destroyed. I really like that, and those are probably some of the most memorable, like, emotions, like what made me feel the most throughout this case. But I'm not sure if I should rank it like lower because there's like less specific moments like that, or higher because like the overarching themes are better. Just as a side note, Genocide Jack remembering everything and not saying anything up to that point was absolute BS. When she looked at Junko and said, "Who are you?" And she's like, "I'm the mastermind," and she's like, "Oh, nice to meet you." That's BS, because Junko would have, or Genocide Jack would have known Junko already at that point in time. I think that is a huge plot hole, especially considering that Genocide Jack is how you find out a lot about what's going on outside when Junko decides to stop expositioning and wants one of y'all to do it. I'm leaning the lower ends, not gonna lie. I honestly think this ending is kind of a slog. Like, there's good stuff here, don't get me wrong, right? Good overarching themes, some good revelations, some really cool things to figure out in the investigation, but this case takes so long. And when you really think about it, you don't discover all that much. Like, yeah, what you do discover is like a really, really, really big deal, but there's not enough different things going on here to constitute this case's length. Especially when the beginning of the trial is just pulling over this stuff, which is by far the worst stuff in the whole franchise, investigating the murder of Masked Man and whatnot. So I am putting it in C. I do think it is a good ending. Don't get me wrong. I do think it is a good ending, but playing through this, I do feel like is a slog. I don't really like the concept of going through this again, or like watching someone go through this. It's just too easy to figure out too early. And when you do figure it out, like when a normal person would figure it out, it just takes so long for the characters to get on the same page. But it is serviceable. C tier. And you know what? That's another ranking that's just lower than I thought it was gonna be. I thought I was gonna put this one higher, but like, upon closer inspection, serviceable. But now we gotta